Professor Tam's chair of the ACBC Victoria Education and Training Working Group, and he has been leading our education sector summits and activities for the last 14 years. So he has a wealth of knowledge. So Ankit, over to you. Thank you. You're on mute, Ankit. No, you've gone, sorry, you've gone back on mute. Are we right? Can you? There we go. Gotcha.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Ankit, you're still on mute.
I didn't do anything. Yep. Is that okay?
You're good now. Good now.
Yeah. Yeah. Start again. Thank you, Virginia. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to today's roundtable discussion. And I just want to provide some kind of a big picture overview. You know, as an advanced economy, Australia, of course, like many other advanced economy, had a very large services sector. Our service sector accounts for almost 60% of our GDP and employ almost 80% of the labor force. And the education sector, of course, is one of the star performing service sector, because the international education sector, actually, as you all know, is #1 export from Victoria and #3 in national terms. So what happened to this sector means a lot to the economy and how Australia can develop. And the COVID situation have really dealt quite a lot of challenges to the sector, as Virginia had already alluded to some of the figures, and I don't want to bore you with more. But in any way, we do have a globally competitive industry that have been really grown up on the basis of competitive advantage. So my question, I guess, that troubled me a little bit since COVID is that since we have got this really great industry, are we going to go the way of the Australian automobile industry that disappear from this face of the earth? Now, I hope not, because there are many factors that, to me, that says that the industry can survive and in a sustainable way. I just want to mention a few perhaps points. Firstly, the success of this sector is not built on protection or subsidies from government. And secondly, I think demand for international education is still very strong. Just some really broad figure that might be of interest is that, you know, annually we have about estimated 5 million mobile international students who are studying outside of their country in the world every year, 5 million. And of that, 20% usually go to the US, and Australia, we have about 6 to 8% coming to Australia. So this is a big figure in anybody's term. And perhaps, Seth, would you mind displaying slide 1 and 2, please? So the top, US is of course the largest destination, and you look at the 10 sources of the international student, China and India, very much similar to Australia, but then they have a much smaller spread of source country, about 2 to 1%, other than South Korea's 5%, quite unlike Australia. But the interesting thing is that international students only account for about 5 or 6% of their total tertiary education enrollment. Next slide, please. Whereas in Australia, there are 5 top sources of international education are again China and India, but then it is almost the next 3 or 4 major ones are all in Asia. And a significant difference from US is that the international students actually account for almost 30% of our student population. Now, so that to me means that there are really a lot of room to move for Australia yet because of those volume there. And China is one of our major markets. And even in China, in the highest record year of outward bound international students from China in that year, there were over 700,000 students going out during that year from China. So it has been on an upward trajectory for a long time. And we have also, of course, benefit from it and make a very successful industry out of that. And the other factor that to me is important, that there is hope, is that there are a lot of high school students studying in English, whether entirely in English. There are international school run by foreign school or partnership schools. They produce, or they have enrollment of almost 500,000 students doing English curriculum. And there's another 300,000 Chinese students in high school who are doing partial or complete English program in Chinese schools. So there are a lot of students who are still, and their parents still wanting their children to go to an overseas destination. And if we do our job correctly, I think there are still a lot of room for us to regain what is lost in the last couple of years. Seth, can you put the last slide up, please? So I want to just show you, in my mind, some kind of stress test on how we can recalibrate our international education to make it even stronger and more sustainable. Well, and there are some factors that we need to check, I guess. One of the things that I think drives students from their home country to a foreign education destination is that there is quality gap. And of course, it has always been there for a long time. But of course, as we all know, China is catching up and India catching up as well in their quality gap. But still, I think there are, I think that's why I put a plus and minus sign there, I guess. And then very importantly, particularly in recent time, is a welcoming and safe environment. And I think Australia, compared to our main competitor, like US, we are still very strong in this. But although we are hearing students experiencing some kind of discrimination recently, and that is something I think all education institutions need to help alleviate the hurt and harmful effect on this. And then of course, competition from our rival destination country, the traditional one of course is they are the English-speaking one, US, UK, and Canada. And in many respects, they have done a little bit better than us by opening up or remaining open for students to go there, whereas we are totally closed. So that is something we are not very strong in this. And I guess for provider, we can't do much about it because it's really government policy, I guess. And in terms of student experience and employability advantage, in the past 20 years, students who had a foreign degree going home would have an advantage, but not so much anymore. So we need to really add value to how we can help students when they go home to be able to compete with their home country graduates. And migration and work experience, yes, there are plus and minus reason, and family reason. There are the more students they have brought their family here means that they will bring more of their relatives. So this is something I think is not always a focus for our so-called marketing effort. And one important factor I think that we have neglected is that the rising middle class in China and India and other countries, that they are the parents and the employers, they are looking for not just their language ability, but in fact their really global outlook of a middle class, because they all have this kind of expectation and aspiration. And if we don't continue to do that, we might actually be at a disadvantage in competing with other destination countries. And I think lastly, in checking our stress during this pandemic is that we need to think about better use of our tangible and intangible resources of all the stakeholders. What do I mean? I mean that we need to use our, say, campus facility and space better, and to give students a better experience and to help them with employment preparation. And then we need to consider, how we can also use teachers who had actually taught us or years gone by. And although some of those teachers may have already left the original university, can we make use of them? Because particularly for Asian students, they have a little bit more affinity usually with their teachers. And if we can make resources, that will be a very effective means to connect with them. And potentially, the student alumni network, both here and overseas, is another very important resources to help us recalibrate and to renew our effort to gain our market share. And I would pass back to Virginia for our key speaker to speak. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you, Ankit, for that terrific overview. And I know from the years I've been working with you that the mentoring, caring and nurturing of our international students has always been top of your agenda. So thank you very much for highlighting that again. It's now my absolute pleasure to introduce Pascale Cuesta. She is the Vice-Chancellor and President of Swinburne University and has been in that role for just over 12 months, coming at a time when you could only say it was a challenging period. So Pascale, a very warm welcome, and I'm very grateful for you to give her your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virginia, and thank you for inviting me to be today as part of this important discussion. I will start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in eastern Melbourne. And of course, this is a land where the campuses of Swinburne are built, not just at Hawthorne, but also on Turner and Croydon. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. It is a pleasure to be part of a virtual roundtable and critical discussion. I think we all agree that it would be better if we were in the same room having these discussions, but short of that, technology to the rescue. Certainly the case for technology, I think, has been soundly fought and won over the last year or so. So Swinburne University of Technology is obviously a university that is focused on technology, but importantly on bringing technology and people together to build a better world. And this important intersection of people and technology is, I think, as critical now as it's ever been. Our world has become both smaller and larger, I guess, with the inability to freely travel. We must consider how we intend to have meaningful impact on the broader community in those changed conditions. The COVID-19 pandemic that we are still living through, and I think last year we would have thought we were over it, but we're still very much in the throes of it, has been challenging for everyone. But while it's been challenging, I actually think it's also demonstrated that we are at a critical cross-section of how to consider our international footprint. And I think those people who are hoping that things will become post-COVID the same as they were before probably need to kind of stop and consider what the impact of this. And there's no reason why this impact cannot be a positive one. How do we support a positive integrated learning for students wherever they are, whether they be here in Melbourne, but around the globe as well? So Swinburne is adapting. And I tend to think that while the COVID-19 crisis brought things to a front very quickly, the whole education sector was shifting anyway. It just precipitated things. We've encountered change at an accelerated pace. But digital disruption, advancement in technology were already profoundly transforming the world of work and the world of study. And in the same way, the jobs of today are changing and entirely new industries are being created. And there will be the environment in which our learners of today will need to evolve and grow. And I think this is why we must ensure that we offer the very best opportunities for international students right now, no matter where they are, no matter whether they are on our shore or offshore. We must think and act differently to fully engage and support future learning opportunities. Now, clearly, my accent is not a local East Melbourneian one, so you will understand that I'm a passionate advocate for international education from personal experience of the many benefits that it provides. I'm very much the product of global education. I commenced my studies in my native France, continued my learning journey in the United States, and then went to get terminally qualified by getting a PhD in New Zealand. So I come to you with a great deal of lived experience, and every single international students that I deal with today, I speak from the bottom of my heart when I say, this will transform you. This will change you. You will not be the person that you would otherwise have been. And our mission is to make you a better person than the person that you would have been. And that, I think, is our shared mission. So these experiences have really taught me the importance of being a global citizen, but also a global learner. Knowledge is a global construct. It doesn't belong to any one nation. And so our task is to share it and to make it grow by growing the human capital that tomorrow needs us to develop. A global outlook allows you to take on challenges in new ways by drawing on diverse experiences. A global outlook encourages you to think in a different way to ensure that a range of perspectives are considered and that diversity is not the exception, but the norm. And the global outlook is actually critically important for our staff who do work on solutions to global problems in research, but also to our students who will become work-ready graduates in a global world tomorrow. I don't think we need to debate the merits of international education anymore, just like technology. I think that debate has been had and it has been won. I do regret, however, that international education has been valued more for the financial impact on the sector than for the profound cultural impact, the soft diplomacy benefit, the way in which people can engage in sometimes heated debate, but where respect, mutual respect and understanding can actually prevail. I think this is a true value of global education, more so than whatever positive impact it may have had on the balance sheet of universities. So how then do we continue with this ambitious goal of building in Australia a successful global education engine? Now, we are fortunate being in Victoria because the Victorian government has shown that it understands the importance of international students to our culture and our economy. We very much welcomed the Victorian government's announcement earlier this month for a $50 million international education resilience fund. That resilience fund, which is part of a set of measures to help Victoria's university maintain international education programs and support international students in the wake of ongoing border closures, has been very welcome. In November last year, the Victorian government had announced a funding of $33.4 million to support the short-term economic recovery of the international education sector, emphasis on short-term. We all thought it was just a matter of holding for 6 months and we'll be all right. I think we know now that this is actually something much more chronic and something that we need to rebuild better, I guess, or different. So we are grateful that, in fact, not just the Victorian government, but also society as a whole has seen the devastating impact that COVID-19 has had on the higher and vocational education sector. and that we're all taking steps to try and attract and keep international students at Victorian University, much like Swinburne. We will continue to work with the Victorian government on a plan to return international students to Victoria. I'm saying this in the middle of lockdown 6.0, which was supposed to be a 1 week short and sharp lockdown, and which we are still experiencing. It's very difficult for our international students and for would-be students to actually make plans. I remember just how stressful it was when you had to apply for a visa in the hope of going somewhere. Now, at the moment, for students, even those who are really very dedicated to coming to Australia, it is almost an impossible task. You know, will they have to quarantine? Will there be some flights? Will they have a visa? Is the vaccine that they received an appropriate one? It is the same issue as there ever was in changing country, but it is multiplied by the complexity of all that health layer that has been added to it. Over the last 10 years, of course, international education has been, as was said before, Victoria's largest service export industry. It has generated over 70 billion for the economy in that time. And directly or indirectly, international education supports a great deal of work opportunity. Over 80,000 Victorian jobs in 2018 were estimated. Now, Victoria accounts for almost 1/3, or used to account for almost 1/3 of Australians onshore international. It remains to be seen whether post-pandemic we will continue to hold that place. But it's important to note that actually those students, and there were over 1 million in the last few years, they've graduated from Victorian schools, from Victorian TAFEs, from Victorian colleges, from Victorian University. You know, sometimes the debate has been too focused on just how decimated universities were, but I think it's been the whole education sector. We need to recognize this. And it's also the whole of society, because those learners had families, had activities, had jobs, and in their small way, they contributed to making Victoria successful. So we need to find meaningful ways to support those students who have supported us for so long. And we need to actually encourage those who wish to study in Australia to do so with confidence. So now is not the time, even though we are in lockdown, to just twiddle our thumb and hope for a solution. Now is the time for us to plan for the short term and to plan for the long term and to make it happen. I think in the short term, we need to support the international students who have been caught here. Some of them are graduating. They are uncertain about whether they could go home. Others are hoping to finish their degree, but have got a practical component which has not yet been finished. And many of them have suffered financial duress of a magnitude that they did not expect because they thought that they would have a part-time job. So we know that we have put a lot of support to assist our students, but we know that for many students, in addition to the financial duress, in addition to the challenges of their study, there has been a real impact on their mental health, because like all young people who are cooped up in lockdown, they are experiencing this very challenging and perhaps at times pessimistic time of a long tunnel when you don't see the light at the end of it. So we need to support and assist our students who are here, as much as encourage and assist the students who are thinking of coming here. So perhaps one of the examples that I wanted to talk about is the way in which partnership that we can build with partners overseas can assist in providing that kind of more seamless support of the students from wherever it is that they are to when they come and start to study with us. So one of the wonderful relationships that we have put in place is the Shandong University of Science and Technology, SDUST. And we share with SDUST long-term commitment to cultivate graduates with practical skills that they need to succeed. I think this is a hallmark of Swinburne. We provide a very practical type of education. We believe in learning by doing, mastery through practice, and a lot of students are very sensitive to that. In the past 4 years, we have deepened our collaboration to offer students a high quality and truly global education experience. And earlier this year, in support of Swinburne students who were unable to come to travel to Australia, we actually successfully established an overseas learning center for Swinburne students at SDUST, Jinan's campus. In the longer term, of course, Swinburne is grateful to have been granted the opportunity by the Minister of Education in China to form a joint institute with SDUST, and we're greatly looking forward to the official launch, which will happen in October. Swinburne College at SDUST, as it will be known, will offer a high-quality education experience for students in engineering and design, including robotics, mechatronics, software, mechanical engineering, and industrial design, all the stuff that we're really good at and that we enjoy doing. But it also means that the students will have the opportunity to graduate with two degrees, one from Swinburne, one from ESDAST, and it shows an important connection between the two countries, and one that we hope, despite all of the noise at the moment, we will expect that it will continue to grow, because countries do not make friends, people make friends. Countries do not have relationship, people have relationship. And at the end of the day, we're in the people business. And this is through people that we want to enrich the strong tie that we have with China. We must recognize that international education does not encapsulate only international students who come to Australia. It will include increasingly Australians who want to travel to other countries, but also foreign students who want to study an Australian degree, but not necessarily come to Australia. So there's a whole range of variation that comes into it. We understand the benefits for Australian students broadening their experiences in China. The soft diplomacy skills will come very handy in the years to come. I think we all know that. And we have an outbound mobility program that sees Swinburne students travel to and study in China, with more than 250 students who have had this opportunity since 2018. We are keen to see those outbound numbers grow. We will have to wait until the borders reopen, but we will continue to provide the support that we can with the assistance of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And you know, the new Colombo plan, I think we all agree, really changed the face of things. As a nation, in the longer term, I think we must continue to remind international students of the reason to come to Australia to continue their education. Australia has long been the top choice for international study, and we must do everything we can to continue in that reputation. Key elements of this response include new initiatives to support the reintegration of international students onto our campuses and into our communities. Swinburne, for one, looks forward to working with local businesses and industry in support of international students. There is nothing more sad than an international student that goes back to their home country saying they haven't made friends. It is actually our task to link them to industry, link them with domestic students and with others, so that they can go back feeling confident that they have friends in Australia. And this is part of our Swinburne New Horizon 2025 strategy. Our plan is to bring people and technology together to build a better world. And with this plan, we choose to build Swinburne as a prototype of a new and very different university, one that is truly of technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. We will play a distinct role in contributing to society's increasing need for technology and for the human talent that can make it work. And achieve that vision will require out-of-the-box thinking and determination, but we know it can be done. So our strategic plan, for instance, is as simple as, and as complicated as, 4 moonshots. The big strides that we will want to take to create that vision of bringing people and technology together would actually be summarized in 4 moonshots, of which the first 2 are very relevant to our international students. The first one is that every Swinburne learner will get a work experience. This is important because right through our undergraduate programs and our postgraduate program, we now guarantee work experience to all of our students. And we know that international students will benefit from this. They will enjoy the placements, the internships, and the industry-linked project. And our second moonshot is perhaps even more ambitious, which is that every Swinburne graduate gets a job, whether it's a job here, whether it's a job in their home country, whether it's a job they take, or whether it's a job they create. We are quite agnostic. We just want them to have the opportunity and the potential to actually find their place in a tech-rich future and to contribute in a way that is quite unique. We know that employers will value this. We know that they value our Swinterns very much, and we intend to continue this at a fast pace. So in closing, just to stress that international students are very valued members of our community, and it is not because of the money they contribute, it is because of the lovely diversity and global thinking that they bring. They contribute to the culture of Swinburne, certainly. They create a vibrant community, and their global outlook and broadening of our domestic students is actually not a small part of their contribution. Beyond the university, of course, they contribute to society and to the broader economy, as Victoria has realized and now fully acknowledged. So I look forward to the day, hopefully not in a too distant future, that we can welcome back our international students on our campuses with open arms, even if we have to socially distance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pascale, for all that enthusiasm and for sharing your personal experiences. I think it is invaluable as an international student. We certainly share your thoughts about the people-to-people relationships. We're focused on people-to-people, business-to-business, and really letting their politics just to take care of themselves while being aware of it, not trying to react to it too much. And you gave some really good segues there into the next speaker when you mentioned the Victorian government's commitment to international education. And in that regard, in thanking you, I'm delighted to introduce Kurt Mullane as our next speaker. Kurt currently leads the Victorian Department of Education and Training's Global Learning and Engagement Strategy in schools and across corporate functions. He's also responsible for overseeing the department's international partnerships and supporting more than 5,500 international students who've chosen Victorian schools as a study destination. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Kurt. And just before I do that, I would just like to remind everyone to do put your questions. I've seen you taking notes. Pop your questions in the chat room and we will get to those as soon as we can. So over to you, Kurt. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep. So yeah, thank you, Virginia, for the invitation. Very, very pleased to be here. And I too would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands upon which we're each meeting today, elders past and emerging and present. And I too am on the Wurundjeri lands out here in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. So thank you, Kit, for your opening comments, particularly your early shout out for the importance of global citizenship learning for all young people. Something that, Pascale, you also echoed, which is music to my ears, personally and professionally. And also, Pascale, for your shout out to the reality, I think, that a lot of the things that have come to the surface through COVID were actually bubbling away underneath the surface anyway and have put us on a quicker trajectory to where we're heading at the moment. So I'm not going to pretend to represent the whole of the Victorian government today. So I'm clearly talking from the perspective of the Department of Education and Training, but also our colleagues over in Department of Job precincts and regions who also have significant courage for international education in this state. So I just wanted to begin by, I suppose, acknowledging, and I don't know whether you're going to see any slides come up on your screen. Oh, thanks, Zach. Cheers, mate. So I just wanted to begin by, I suppose, just calling out that the internet, the second slide there, yeah, thank you, that the international education relationship between Victoria and China is very, very well established over a long period of time, and is underpinned, I think, by the reputation that Victorian education providers have built around excellence, collaboration, and friendship, and those very personal connections and alliances that Pascale alluded to earlier on. And I think that the strength of that relationship is evidenced obviously by the strong numbers of Chinese students who choose to study here in Victoria, the contribution that they make to lecture theatres and classrooms and tutorials, but also workplaces and the community more broadly. As has already been stated, this is Victoria's largest services export, generating 13.7 billion in revenue in 2019, which accounts for almost half of Victorian services exports in that period, supporting almost 80,000 jobs. This is a big enterprise from purely the economic lens. So obviously COVID-19 and associated border closures has led to drops in export revenue, 23% across 2020. Of course, this has significantly impacted many areas of the economy, not just the international education sector, but as was stated before by Pascale, this has disrupted the lives of many, many students and their families, and it's provided challenges for all of our education institutions, perhaps in ways that we've never experienced before, or perhaps across this length of time before. So it is the case that Chinese students, and I'm reflecting here on those that are in schools, but also those that are in tertiary institutions, have shown incredible resilience over the past 18 months, with the majority of tertiary students based in China studying remotely. In fact, 64% of all Chinese students with Australian visas studying with Victorian providers are currently located offshore. So again, I think this is a testament to the strong relationships and the solid reputation and the quality education offerings in this state. And we're going to have to really draw heavily on all of that collateral and all of that IP as we move towards the next phase of pandemic recovery. So amongst all that's happened over the past 18 months, I think it's very, very fair to say that Victoria remains a vibrant and attractive study destination for international students. We've seen no data, no research to suggest otherwise. And China, of course, remains a critical source of international students to the state. And whilst we've seen a decrease in enrolments across all markets as borders have closed, and we've moved to remote learning, Chinese students in particular, those in higher education, but also in schools, have sought to continue their education with Victorian providers as opposed to choosing other destinations. So I think this is a good sign and should give us confidence in what we have to offer, but also reinforce all of that back-end work that's been done over many, many years to make international students feel like this is a place that is like home and a place where you can achieve your aspirations. They're all things which we can build upon. So we've seen new students continuing to apply for courses and accept offers, beginning their studies online, but with the aim and the aspiration to sometime in the near future to join face-to-face learning where possible. And the surveying clearly shows that students have a preference for in-country learning at some point in time, and that's in schools and post-schools. And we're going to have to be very mindful of that as we move forward. So I think while the Australia-China bilateral relationship at the national level is certainly keeping us all guessing, Victoria has continued to consolidate long-standing relationships and partnerships in China, and in particular our sister state relationship with Jiangsu, which is now 40 years young, as well as partnerships in Sichuan, for example. And these continue to flourish across many different export sectors. Also notable, I think, is the significant impact that Victoria is achieving through the 5 Victorian trade and investment offices across Greater China: Beijing, Shanghai, Chengdu, Nanjing, and Hong Kong. Now, these are really important operations, both operationally, but also symbolically. And I think they indicate very clearly to market that Victoria is here for the long haul. And education engagement across the offices is, of course, a key priority. And in fact, Victoria's investment in the trade and investment offices represents the biggest investment of its type of any Australian state or territory, and is certainly building an excellent track record of securing opportunities for the sector. So just to quickly recap this type of supports that have been provided by government for international students over the past 18 months or so. And I break it into 2 categories. One is at the tertiary level and the other is at the school level. So was mentioned before about the International Education Short-Term Recovery Plan 2020 to 21, including those things that are mentioned there on the slide you can see. So I think the government has been very proactive in dealing both with the here and now, so the immediate crisis management, if you like, but also laying the foundations for post-pandemic rebuild. So last December, the government released the short-term recovery plan, which included study hubs, Study Melbourne International Research Partnerships, and pathway scholarships. The first physical Study Melbourne hub opened in Shanghai in March 2021. providing a location for online learners to come together and study collectively, access support and information on studying in Victoria, and build their cohort experience through events and engagement activities. And so far, over 1,000 students have used the study space, with another 850 attending events run by Study Melbourne education providers. And in fact, we ran a program there virtually through the International Education Division a few months ago for education agents. And wow, it looks a very, very impressive venue. And those that were present certainly reported back that it was a really great place to be. So one of the notable things about the Study Hub, I think, is it helps students commence their Victorian study journey before coming here in person. And that sort of feeds back to some of the things that were mentioned by earlier speakers around the sort of A to Z, end-to-end education experience is evolving, needs to evolve. And when you're talking about potential blended models of a bit of time in your own home country and time here in Victoria, it's the availability of these sorts of spaces and hubs which make that blended model possible. The concept of these hubs is expanding to KL, to Ho Chi Minh City and Bangalore. And they will continue to operate once borders do reopen and play that transition role of serving as a centre for prospective students. And also earlier this month, as was mentioned before, the government announced $50 million International Education Resilience Fund, which provides universities with grants to support the resilience and sustainability of their international education offerings. The funding available for increased offshore and onshore student welfare and support services, much needed, improved delivery of remote and offshore teaching and learning, and increased offshore student engagement initiatives. And just yesterday, we saw Minister Pakula announce an additional $1.1 million towards targeted support for international student wellbeing. And this funding is earmarked to go towards projects that address priority issues for international students, including social isolation, sexual and mental health and employability, and also providing single and multi-day excursions to different parts of Victoria when it is safe to do so. And also the 2022 Melbourne International Student Week, which is the festival events at Fed Square to be delivered by the Committee for Melbourne, connecting international students to the Victorian community and showcasing the benefits of international education to the wider population. So these are just some of the initiatives within the broader package and an indication of the ongoing commitment that the government has to this sector. And I've also just mentioned that in support of our Chinese students and bolstering their employability, which is something that was mentioned before by speakers, Study Melbourne has increased its offerings of career development, entrepreneurship, internship and industry engagement programs virtually and in person, really responding to that market demand that's known. In relation to schools, keeping in mind that there's around 4,000 students, international students, who are now studying in Victorian government schools and around about 2,500 in the non-government school sector. So also a very large program seen in its whole. So the department has been very, very focused on providing supports for international students in schools. So we have 2 grant programs, one which is already completed, another one which is about to be launched, which is providing grants to schools to help them ensure that with declining student enrolments, that schools don't lose the staffing expertise and the IP that they've built up over many, many years. So every school has an international student coordinator who is there to provide the day-to-day support for students. We don't want to lose that capability. So that's part of what the grants to schools enables. We've also had financial hardship provision for students and their families. We have had a school holiday programs. We've now got, I think there's more than 1,000 students under the age of 18 who have been onshore here in Victoria for 18 months now. Some longer than that, actually heading towards 2 years, who have not been back to their home country to see their family. So you can imagine that is a very, very difficult time for those students. So what do they do, for example, in school holidays, particularly if they're home staying with a Victorian family? So we've been organising activities that keep them occupied and keep them connected. And we've also had to invest quite heavily in tailored mental health and wellbeing supports for students, as well as provide online learning, new ways of assessing students who are doing that learning, and ways that we can keep those students connected with each other in ways that aren't face-to-face. So a lot of activity to deal with the here and now, and then there's also the next phase of recovery. And I think it very much is the case that we've been in the eye of the storm, and we're well, it feels at times, of course, like we're emerging from the storm, and then we find ourselves back in the middle of it again. But I think Pascale mentioned this before, that nothing will be the same. Certainly we're not going to slip back into life as it was prior to COVID, and international education sector as it was prior to COVID. The pandemic has presented us with many opportunities to change the what and how we deliver our education and training services. And across the sector, we've seen Victorian providers undertaking a lot of innovation, new models of delivery and new products, blended programs, internships pivoting to remote experience or in-person in students' home countries such as China, TAFEs developing new teacher qualifications that have been very much welcomed in China. As mentioned before, establishing new study centres with Chinese partners to help students connect as a cohort. And that's, of course, at the same time as China's own education landscape is changing. An ageing population that will impact on the number of younger Chinese, but higher education reforms, which will continue to offer opportunities to Victoria. For example, a change in the ratio of higher ed to vocational education places will mean that parents will continue to seek quality higher education for their children offshore. And at this moment in time, the government of China continues to encourage students to undertake technical studies overseas and bring those skills back to China. So full sector recovery will clearly take time. And there's no proven off-the-shelf blueprint for doing what we're doing now. We're all learning on the run, but that's how some of the best innovation occurs, of course. But I think it will be the collective work undertaken by education providers, along with government, along with our partners in country, and the way that we can continue to make a holistic offering here, which is going to be really critical in that recovery phase. So I'm just conscious of time, so I just wanted to finish by going to the last slide if I can, Zach. I'll skip over the second last one, but just with the last one, there are, of course, some things that we don't know, and some elephants in the room. And why I call them elephants in the room is these are influencing factors over which we have various levels of push and pull capacity to determine and direct. And none of these are insurmountable, but it will take a collective effort for us to move forward. So international border opening, reopening timelines, obviously critical for many reasons. I think the main one being it's what students want. Students want to be here. They want to be in Victoria largely, and they want to be studying in real time. Quarantine and vaccination requirements into 2022. What does it mean if you're an international student coming to Victoria? If you've already had a vaccination program, for example, what does it mean when you get here? What's your status? What might you need to do when you get here? All of those really critical questions. And what kind of quarantine might be required of you? I know these things are being mapped out through the student return plan and so forth, but as we speak at the moment, still a lot of unanswered questions there. Public sentiment on sector rejuvenation is a priority. I mean, I'd like to think that all of the Victorian public understand the importance of this sector, not just from an economic perspective, but all the other lenses through which Pascale mentioned before as well. But there has been some mixed messaging to public around this sector and where it sits in the priority, in a long list of priorities. So I think there's some work to do there to support positive public sentiment to the return of international students as soon as possible. And I think all institutions are still trying to understand how deep the impact on sector expertise and operational can-do has been, and how this will inform, the pathway back. I think we're going to learn that, continue to learn that as we move along. But critical we understand that. And also demand for new education services and products. In a school sector, we've got a pretty good idea of what kind of diversified product students and their families might be interested in. There's a number of steps, as you would appreciate, between that and prototyping those and then scaling them up and building them into business as usual offerings, if you like. So I'll pause there, finish there. Thank you again for the invitation. I hope that was useful. My contact details are there, and more than happy to take any questions offline if people would like to do that. So thanks, Virginia.
Good, thank you so much. Thank you for that very optimistic note, which also echoes Pascale's comments too. So it's very good to be moving forward with a degree of optimism and a few strategies already in place. So that's wonderful. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Councillor Davydd Griffiths from the City of Melbourne. The City plays an active leadership role in international education and has been advocating for the safe return of students to pre-pandemic levels. Davydd has worked as a school teacher for many years and remains passionate about the power of education to transform lives and correct communities. So it's my pleasure to introduce Davydd, and over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia, and thanks for the opportunity to come along and speak on such an eminent panel today. There are little moments when I sometimes feel like I am the first year out school teacher that I was many moons ago, and that being around such learned and informed people is an opportunity that I genuinely relish and often reflect on the fact that some of the very first classes I ever taught were of international students. I was an English language teacher. I taught at Glen Waverley Secondary College and McRobb Girls back in the day. And when I was thinking about, as I think Pascale was talking about, some of those things that international students bring to our city, more than just those economic benefits, I think about how they helped form my opinion of myself as a teacher and as an adult, as I was emerging into adulthood. And I look back very fondly on many of those students that I've had, and many that I still stay in touch with, and who, for a country boy who'd come to the city, really helped me form a much broader worldview than that I had when I first became a teacher. I want to also echo the acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land that we've heard from the other speakers so far today. I'm talking to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, but certainly pay my respects to all of the traditional owners of the lands, and very much acknowledge the fact that as we all embark on our lifelong learning journeys, that we have a huge amount to learn from the original owners of the land, and their custodianship should be informative to all of us about the ways that we should live our lives. I also need to start with a little bit of an apology. I presume that many of you over the last 18 months or so have probably seen a meme that's been going around of something on the lines of "Start Zoom meeting, man over the road starts leaf blower," which for many of us has been true over recent times. Well, it's a little bit different for me today. It's a case of start Zoom meeting, have SES over the road pulling down chimney that fell down in Melbourne's earthquake yesterday, which was not something I ever thought I'd be saying. And I always like to start my speeches with something a little bit topical and sort of timely. I almost wish at the moment that there were less topical, timely things that were happening on a 24-hour basis for me to start my speeches with. But it also gave me a little moment just to reflect a little bit on the earthquake that we experienced yesterday, but also how we respond to that and other challenges I've got a 10-year-old son at home, and as you might imagine, there was first a few moments where he was scared, but then a full day of excitement and a full day of wanting to talk about the earthquake, talking about what might happen next, and imagining both good and bad scenarios. He enjoys scaring himself a little bit, as all 10-year-olds do. And it was an interesting role for me as a father to think about what's the right thing to do when talking about something like that with him. It's obviously scary in and of itself. It's unlikely to occur again, though I can't obviously give him a guarantee of anything like that. And it's also important to, as one of the leaders of the household, think about just exactly how much fear is important to have in the conversation versus how much reassurance versus how much planning. And in reflecting on those things, I was thinking about what that really means in terms of many of the other issues that we're thinking about in our society at the moment, and obviously the emergence from COVID being the most apt that we're talking about today. And I think it's important to reflect that while we need to acknowledge the size of the disruption, we can't deny the reality that we're living through. It's important for all of us to be calm and thoughtful and have a clear plan of how we move forward. And that gives reassurance not only to all of us who work in this sector in many different ways, but also to the society more broadly, and that's a really important thing, particularly when we're talking about international students who very often are quite rightly worried about all sorts of things, from things as simple and fundamental as where their next meal is coming from, right through to the great global questions that people who choose to study and choose to be intellectuals and academics, as many of them aspire to be, the things that they contemplate and think about. And so it's fantastic to follow on from speakers today who all have that optimism, albeit grounded in a very clear reality that we've experienced over the last 18 months, some of the most disruptive and amazing experiences that anyone has in the last 100 years. I'm really hopeful that Melbourne has no more 1 in 100 year events in the next 3 years of my council term. I feel like we've had more than enough 1 in 100 year events in the last week or so, let alone the recent months. We've already heard today a number of statistics about what international education means to the country, to the state. There are similar ones for the city economy. But as other speakers have said, we know that international students bring far more than just those economic benefits. And when I walk around the streets of our city, I came down here to study myself many, many moons ago. But when I think about suburbs like Carlton, where 39% of the residents were international students, 38% of residents in the CBD were international students, 15% in South Bank, 14% in Docklands. There's absolutely no doubt about the fact that when you walk around the streets at the moment, you feel the absence of those international students, and you feel the absence of the vibrancy and the life that they bring to our city over and above any economic effects that they might be having. And that's something that I'm acutely aware of as a councillor, because the city that I love and the city that I choose to be a part of is one that thinks of itself quite rightly as an education city, as a university and a tertiary education city, but also from that very beginning, from preschools and right through the school sector as well. That's something that we at the City of Melbourne are particularly committed to returning. This morning, the Deputy Lord Mayor, Nick Rees, who many of you might know from his Melbourne University hats, and I attended the Melbourne International Student Conference, and that's been a marvellous event that will go on throughout today. But I've been lucky enough to meet with the student organisers of that a couple of times over the last few weeks, and their energy and enthusiasm for sharing the very best aspects of what it means to study in Melbourne has been fantastic. I think the City of Melbourne had got up to the #3 study destination as a city in the world, even #2 in some rankings. Well, we're very committed from a City Council point of view to having that returned, or having that become the #1 student destination anywhere in the world. And we're conscious that that is a long process and very much a collaboration between institutions and other levels of government. And we're doing all we can to support students and those other institutions to further that particular aim. We've done a number of sort of practical things while COVID has been occurring, and many people in the room, I'm sure, would be aware of some of them. But I think back to the $2 million Our Shout food voucher program, which was done in conjunction with Study Melbourne and also the Queen Victoria market. And I think that's an excellent example of addressing some of those very real needs of the many international students who have remained in our city, who we shouldn't forget when we're planning about what the next stages look like. But also that that's a real value add in terms of getting them to experience some of the things that I guess most Melburnians think of as being fundamental to our experience of this city. The Queen Vic market would be a classic example of that. I'm sure there were many international students who previously hadn't been there. And this was a great example of how we can meet a number of policy outcomes and a number of good ends with an investment like that. We're currently going through a process of rolling out our Experience Melbourne ambassadors. That's EM for Experience Melbourne ambassadors. And we have ambassadors from a number of countries who are studying here at the moment. Colombia, India, China, of course, Philippines, Malaysia, Nepal and Saudi Arabia. And they're going to be doing some online ambassador roles to really highlight some of the best aspects of living in our city. That's important in the short term for encouraging people who are already here to experience the best parts of our city. But it's also important in spreading the word overseas through the very many social media connections far above what I might have to their peers, and to encourage them and show them what the best aspects of studying in Melbourne are, so that they can feel encouraged that this is the kind of city that they want to come and be a part of. One of the other things that we've been doing, and this is a little bit of the good news, bad news story, but it's fantastic. In recent days, I've had the opportunity to be at the town hall, which we've opened up as a vaccination centre, particularly with a view to immunising some of the most vulnerable members of our community and international students who often were finding it hard to know where it was that they could access COVID vaccinations. That's been a space that we've been using for that end. There have been international students queuing there from 3 o'clock in the morning some days, which I think, again, emphasises both their commitment to their own health and the health of their fellow citizens in the City of Melbourne, but also of the challenges that sometimes they face in accessing the kinds of health services that perhaps people who've lived in our city long term have a knowledge of. I'm sad to report that that's a space that's had to be closed today due to the events in the city and the protests. And I guess I'm mindful again of what it means to be an international student living in a foreign country and seeing the kinds of disruptions that are occurring on the streets today, and to be very clear and mindful in our messages to the people who are studying here, that this is such a minority of the people who are Victorians and Melburnians, and the vast majority do want to be an embracing, inclusive and forward-looking city and society, welcoming of international students, welcoming of the vast array of contributions that they can bring to the city, and sharing together the very aspects of what it is that make this such a great city to be part of, rather than excluding and rather than, let's be blunt, taking the kinds of actions that we have seen in the city over the last couple of days. I could go on at quite some length, believe me, about the important roles that we as a city, and particularly the Lord Mayor, has undertaken in the last 18 months to work with the state and federal governments to ensure that international students can return as quickly as possible in a safe and organised way. We'll continue to do that, and we'll continue to work with institutions at every opportunity. We don't hold all of the levers at the City of Melbourne to allow those things to happen, but I think that we quite rightly see ourselves as having the opportunity to bring people together into the room to have those discussions, and particularly help the federal government in its considerations of the best ways to ensure that the City of Melbourne and the institutions directly in our city and more broadly across Melbourne have the opportunity to return to a new normal, a better normal than it was before, where international students are able to lead their very best lives and help us as a city lead our very best life. Thank you again for the opportunity to be part of today, and I look forward to questions as we have a little bit of time left for them, hopefully, as the afternoon rolls on.
Thank you, David. That's terrific to have you. And I know Sally, our Lord Mayor, is a great proponent of international education. So terrific to have you as part of this wonderful push that we have, a combined effort. Thanks for your good words there. Now, our final speaker, I'm delighted to introduce Frances Coppolillo. She is an experienced senior leader in Victoria's education sector with particular expertise in vocational education and training in higher education. I'm delighted to hand over to you, Frances, for a few words, and then hopefully at the end of that we may have some time for Q&A. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I really am grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today on what is a really important matter, I think, and important discussion on how we can look forward confidently to a future in international education. I'd like to add my acknowledgements to country. Again, I'm here in the country of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land and water. I understand right now that I stand between you and some questions that the audience obviously has, and also I probably stand between you and lunch. So I will try to be as brief as I possibly can. Today, I'd like to speak to you about our experience as a TAFE institute and how we see the recalibration that needs to take place in the current environment and also into the future, and to try and understand how we're trying to understand whether some of the shifts are short to medium term, and those shifts that will be enduring in the environment as we move forward. Melbourne Polytechnic has been delivering programs to international students on and offshore for about 25 years now. And for our organisation, our staff and students have had a really enriching experience in that involvement. It's made us more globally connected, it's broadened our thinking, and it's supported innovations in practice as well. At both a national and a state level, Melbourne Poly is one of the largest vocational education and training providers in-country international education, and also delivering vocationally focused higher education degrees internationally. Up until March 2020, the TAFE sector had been growing in international revenue and with skills for skills training increasing. Overall, however, for Melbourne Poly, our international students since the pandemic have been less than half of the numbers that we had forecast. 2020 has certainly brought challenges to all of us, and it's been a very difficult year, which has continued into 2021, unfortunately. And of course, the impact in TAFE, whilst relative and significant for us, has not been at the magnitude, if I can use that word, a day after the earthquake, of the impact that has been experienced in Australian universities. And of course, during this time, a lot of our concern has been on the impact of the welfare of our international students, which has been spoken about just before. And we've prioritised a lot of our support to those students. And in doing so, we've been able to retain a significant proportion of those students. Over the years, the needs and expectations from our partners have changed. And whilst we've had a strong history in delivering the traditional China model, our partnership models and our programs have evolved and changed. And one of these models is our Fuzhou Melbourne Polytechnic venture. Fuzhou Melbourne Polytechnic is an Australian Sino-foreign cooperative education institute with an independent legal status, and it was established on the grounds of Mijang University by the university, a private investor, and Melbourne Polytechnic as a non-investing establishment partner. We contribute curriculum expertise, staff, and a commitment to offer quality Australian qualifications into that venture. Given the issues with border closures, we're fortunate to be able to continue our delivery by hiring in-country staff through our Trusted China office, and have resumed and since resumed face-to-face teaching in Fuzhou. For those students who were inbound to Australia as part of that partnership to finalise their qualification and undertake part studies in Australia, we have pivoted to online learning for those students and have been able to continue their studies through that process, and we look forward to welcoming them, of course, hopefully in the not too distant future. Our FMP approach is a good example of how we've had to adapt the model to meet the changing environment and market. The current environment, I think, requires us to embrace change and to adapt. As a sector, we've had to adapt and nurture our existing partnerships and seek the value proposition across both sides so that we can both grow. I can't stress the importance of strong, respectful and complementary objectives in building international education. These are key to the resilience of programs, I think, and in any business, the key to successes is needing to learn to listen, learning to understand the needs and expectations of our partner countries, and have the long view in mind in our approach. Over the last 25 years that we've operated in China, these needs, the needs have changed, and we've changed with it. And it's been important for us to be flexible and agile. Of course, there's commercial opportunity in international education. However, Melbourne Polytechnic not only takes the long view, but also values the opportunity to contribute to improving the lives of millions of people through education. Our international students in TAFE pursue a pathway-based educational experience. They commence with a vocational program and pathway through to higher level vocational programs or onto higher education, many with a vocational provider. International onshore students can often be onshore for 3 to 4 years, purchasing educational services, and they also contribute to campus diversity, renting accommodation, spending on goods and services, as well as working in areas of skill shortage. Typically, 1/3 of TAFE international students pursue further studies. Most most TAFE students in higher education and seek to obtain graduate working visas and remain those students who remain either return home or go on to other countries with strong employment opportunities and really see the value in the education they receive here in Australia. It's important to note that across all Victorian TAFE institutes, students extend their studies because they are more confident in the quality that they are achieving and the success that they are achieving here. They stay because they gain new or higher qualifications. They have the opportunity to undertake further work, part-time work, and access to graduate and post-work study visas. As consumers, international students and their families and friends make significant contributions to the Victorian visitor economy and through accommodation, retail and tourism industries. Our campus spaces are much more vibrant and inclusive with the growth of our international student cohort. International students tend to be progressive and open to new experiences, and our local students have benefited with this mix of students and the friendships that have been built across cohorts. Every year we offer our international students exchange experiences, and that benefits all students across our organisation and broadens their outlook and their careers enormously. So as we look to the future, we see some of the core elements of our success remaining true. Building strong, collaborative relationships with a long view is critical. Adapting to the needs of our partners and our students, responding to the challenges faced by our partners through education, and valuing the benefits of international education, not only to our economy, but also to innovation, to our social fabric and diversity, to the growing friendships that remain enduring over time, and also to the global understanding of education of Australia through international education. So from an educational program perspective, our program offerings need to be responsive with ongoing customisation for differing needs and environments. Our qualifications, both accredited and non-accredited, will remain, but the modalities in which they're offered are shifting. So whilst face-to-face, I believe, will be at the core of an international student experience and is greatly valued, the flexibility of blended learning models and virtual student engagements will form part of the offering in the short to medium term. Whether these remain enduring elements will depend on the quality and experience and expectations of the learners. Micro-credentials, of course, will play a large part in capacity building. Particularly, we're seeing that in our engagement with international industry partners. In the end, despite the paradigm shifts occurring due to the pandemic, recalibrating for the new reality of international education is essentially about what we've always done, that our offer meets a standard, that standard meets expectations of the customer, the learner, the partners, and therefore our international education will continue to be valued, which in turn supports success for all of us. I think I might leave it there. I understand we've gone greatly over time. So thank you. I might stop there and look for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances, and lovely to hear from you from the vocational sector point of view. And look, despite the fact we've gone over time, it has been really, really valuable. I will now hand over to Ankit. I think we have about 5 minutes for questions, and then Celina will do a summary at the end. So Ankit, I'll hand over to you now. Thank you. You're on mute, Ankit, still. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all the speakers for their very insightful and in-depth analysis and views concerning the present and the future of this very important sector. Now, perhaps I would just, given the time, I just maybe throw to all our speakers a couple of questions or points that you might want to picking it up from what you have actually said. For instance, Kurt mentioned public sentiment, and that really is very dear to my heart in the sense that that really relates to what are we expecting, we the people, right? Expecting the provider, particularly public institution like university, to deliver for whom? The bell toll, I guess. And one of the things is that relates to me the importance of in major ways that international education and international students contribute to the development of our, not just our economy, but our society and our community. Now, one of the things is, how do we help to re-image the international students' contribution and role, because it's like almost like, to me, the antithesis towards science, right? A lot of people are anti-science. This is populist promoting. Sometimes I feel that maybe there are also a small but vocal element that are anti-international education, anti-international students. How do we, as you can see, promote the image of international student and the sector as such? We, of course, involved in it, we know it very well, but how are we going to actually help improve that? And another very quick question: business undergraduate students have been the dominant student body, and I think it will change because, as many of you have said, how we teach, what kind of product we need to offer will change. But then, of course, why are we having business as a dominant subject? Because it is scalable and the profit margin is high. So what can we replace it with? I'll leave it to you.
I might have a go.
So
In terms of the image of international students, as you say, and the perception here in Australia, I think that, pandemics generate fear, and fear generates more fear, But I think as we've moved through the different stages and we've started to see the impact on the economy, and I think what we will begin to see, and we've seen some of it already, is the impact on business. And I think there will be others who will shed light on the value of international students through skill gaps that we will have, through vacancies that we won't be able to fill, through the continuation of business operations. So I think the link of international students to our own prosperity will become more visible, and will, as the fear will subside, as the need to have a more joint up understanding of what creates our prosperity becomes more visible.
thank you. Yep. Anyone else want to comment on that?
If I could be somewhat controversial, I mean, I think in many ways the lack of public support that the universities have suffered has been translated in all kinds of unsavory comments, such as, international students coming to take the place of domestic students, when we all know that actually they probably totally subsidize the system. I mean, there is, I can only blame us collectively for not having put together a compelling argument, but there is no doubt that in the crisis, what was demonstrated was the loss of social license that universities had suffered, and the lack of ignorance, I suppose, from society, that our research is subsidized by our teaching is subsidized by international students. That doesn't make it right. That's, it's a very short-term and somewhat unique position that Australia has taken to actually put the hands of the education of its young in a sort of business model that is fundamentally unsustainable, as was demonstrated when the pandemic hit. So how do we change that perception? And when I say government, I want to be quite clear that this was not the case of the Victorian government, but the federal government was pretty clear and saying no sympathy for you. Now, there's more support for industries that dig stuff off the ground that are actually damaging the environment for everyone, and yet there would be support for the mining industry in ways that there would not be support for the higher education sector. I'm baffled by that, but I actually own a responsibility because we clearly have not been able to make a sufficiently compelling case for the fact that knowledge is a global construct, that Australia has got no chance of partaking into 99% of what people know if it doesn't engage globally. And that's what it's all about. It's about engaging globally to access this phenomenal knowledge that resides all around the globe.
Right, that's great. On that note, perhaps I was being reminded that we have passed our time. So, so back to you, And thanks everyone for your participation. And it was really great to hear from people who are now really at the front line to try to help recovery of our most successful industry in a way. And of course, it's more than just an industry.
Thank you. Thanks, Kit, and also to Celina for your enthusiasm in putting this together, and all our wonderful speakers. There are questions unanswered. I have pasted them into emails, so we will try and address them for you, and we'll obviously send out information after this event. So without further ado, I will hand over to Celina, who is our wonderful sponsor for today's event, as well as great supporter. So Celina, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugenia. Distinguished speakers and guests, it's my great pleasure to bookend this excellent ACBC forum. I'm Dr. Celina Yu, the founding managing director of GBCA and EIA. Thank you for attending. Like me, I hope you have been energized by the ideas we have heard today. We are fortunate that today's highly experienced and expert speakers have been able to cover many critical areas, including government policy, sector support, how the higher education and vocational education sectors may face the challenges that having the huge impact on our city and the state. I'd like to summarize 2 key takeaways that were discussed from today. I will then make a few comments about what we are doing at GBCA and EIA. First, the successful recovery innovations identified heavily rely on the key stakeholders working together. Hence, a teamwork approach needs to be front of mind for everybody. Second, recovery needs to be guided by the long-term principles that have served Australia's international education success very well until date. These include quality, integrated community experiences, innovation in course delivery, student support, work-integrated learning, building employment graduates, and global outlook, valuable offshore partners. These need to continue providing both comfort and high-level guidance for recovery. Let me say a few words about GBCA and EIA. We are a dual-sector campus of a Hong Kong publicly listed company operating under Australia's regulatory frameworks. We provide both local and international students with pathways from vocational education to higher education degrees. In order to navigate the current troubling effects of the pandemic, one of the areas of our successful innovation has been to achieve deeper integration with our offshore partners in China. This year, we have been able to jointly design and deliver 37 Australian degrees and vocational education subjects to more than 5,000 Chinese students in a blended model by combining online services with local academic support. Also, every week, we conduct multiple workshops, signature competitions, career support events, and staff training sessions for our partners. Additionally, a new EIA and GBC Offshore Education Center was launched in a partner campus to facilitate all kinds of remote learning and delivery activities. This way, in addition to a much needed revenue injection, we are able to prepare students currently locked out for a future Australian living and student experience, assist our Chinese partners in the process of internationalizing their courses and capacities, and rapidly develop a stronger foundation for a full offshore delivery. I believe those outcomes are a good example of the creation of new opportunities through innovation. So let's stay positive. Let's work together. I firmly believe through the joint efforts made by the federal and state governments, the City of Melbourne, the public and private education sectors, we can restore Victoria's international education standing by implementing a sustainable COVID new normal. Thanks again to our excellent speakers who have offered so much food for thought and optimism. Thanks also to Kate and Virginia and ACBC for organizing this event in this difficult time. I wish you all the best and look forward to seeing you all at the next ACBC reunion. Please take care.